be here with you this morning to celebrate the new year. I am from Berkeley, California. I am the Vice President of Academics of a theological school there. It is the theological school that Bishop Louis is currently studying at. And so I am delighted to be able to come and preach this morning in his church, as he is in my community now, taking care of some of my people. So it is a blessed reversal and a blessed mutuality that we have this morning. I came to, I can pull this out, right, and use it? Yeah. I came to Rwanda with a team of 8 people. And we arrived on Monday evening from California. It took us about 30 hours to get here, so we were a little tired. This is my 4th trip to Rwanda. And I find that as I come each time, things begin to look more and more familiar. I commented to our host when I arrived, I no longer feel like I'm in a foreign country. I'm in my home away from home. The first thing that we did on Tuesday morning is we went to the Genocide Memorial in Kigali. And as an academic, I find that this memorial is really quite wonderful. It is tremendously informative. And I really, really wanted my team and my students to be there to be able to engage the story of Rwanda from the perspective of the Rwandan people. It's always best if we can hear it from the mouth and the words of the people who experienced it. And I want to say that I hesitate to bring up the genocide on the first Sunday of the new year because I think it's a day for celebration. But at the same time, I think the current realities in Rwanda give us much to celebrate, to talk about. The reconstruction and the reconciliation is a word of celebration. And Tuesday, as I wandered through the memorial for the 4th time, I was struck by some new insights and realities. What I really saw the most was the extremity of the trauma that the genocide was for the people here. And at the same time, I saw that in some of the testimonies that there was a very strong statement about a difficulty in ability to trust after the trauma. And in my work as a theologian, I've been studying trauma for many years. And in fact, in the month of November, I was part of a workshop that addressed the concept of moral injury, which is a form of trauma in which the person traumatized has had to participate in or observe an event that violates their moral compass, that violates their internal sense of right and wrong, that it violates it to such an extent that they are emotionally harmed by the situation. And the genocide in 1994 certainly fits that category. And in this particular workshop, we had invited some psychologists to come and have conversation with us about trauma. And one of the things that was so interesting is they agreed together that one of the best ways and the most effective ways for healing trauma was to reconnect into community. And specifically, I would say to reconnect into the Christian faith community, into a community that will listen and hear and validate the stories that are being told about the trauma. Our text this morning that I am preaching from comes from Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, and I was happy to see that it is stated as part of the liturgy also, the greatest commandment. And I'm going to read it again just for the benefit of keeping continuity in the sermon. Hear, O Israel, the Lord God, our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. This text became known as early as the New Testament time as the fundamental law from which all of our teachings come. And in the Gospel of Mark, one of the teachers, in the Gospel of Mark chapter 12, one of the teachers of the law came to Jesus and asked him, what is, of all the commandments, which is the most important? And Jesus answers, the most important one is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and with all your strength. And then he adds a second. He says, the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. These two commandments, if we are to fulfill them, sum up the law. So I ask, how does one turn from mistrust to love? How does one turn from hatred to love? How does one turn from a desire for revenge to love? And I would say to you this morning, Rwanda has and is and will continue to turn from hatred and revenge to reconstruction and reconciliation. I am from the United States, and I was not here during the time of the genocide, and so I cannot explain to you anything about the genocide. But what I can say to you is what I have seen and what I have heard in my 4 trips to Rwanda, and what I understand to be true. I have seen people that have been traumatized by extreme loss turn away from hate, turn away from thoughts of revenge toward forgiveness and reconciliation. I've seen a country of people striving to live into the 2 greatest commandments, love of God and love of neighbor. I've heard testimonies that exemplify the healing power of love and reconciliation. I've seen houses that have been built by victims and perpetrators working side by side. I've read and I've heard reports of your president, Kagame, creating annual events for peace building and education and the alleviation of poverty. Moral injury traumas cause people to turn inward, to withdraw from communities. And ironically, this self-protecting reaction to a traumatic experience is the opposite of what is needed to restore and heal and bring wholeness. Evidence has shown that the greatest healer is the support of a nurturing relationship of a community. And I would suggest the support of a nurturing Christian community is one of the greatest healers of trauma. And so we think once more about the 2 greatest commandments, love of God and love of neighbor. People of Rwanda, I stand before you on this first Sunday of the new year to proclaim The Spirit of the Lord is upon you to bring justice to the nations. You are the suffering servant that Isaiah speaks of in chapter 42, where in chapter 42 Isaiah says, speaking on behalf of the Lord, "Here is my servant, who I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my Spirit upon you. You will bring forth justice to the nations. You will faithfully bring forth justice. You will not grow faint or be crushed until you have established justice in the earth. The coastlands wait for your teaching." Citizens of Rwanda, I say this morning, the Spirit of God is in your midst, shining light onto your works of reconstruction and reconciliation. You are the valley of dry bones that has come back to life, as Ezekiel envisioned in chapter 37. And I read from chapter 37 of Ezekiel. "The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. And he asked me, 'Son of man, can these bones live?' I said, 'Sovereign Lord, you alone know.' Then he said to me, 'Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord.' So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. And then he said to me, 'Prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of Man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breathe from the four winds and breathe into these slain, that they may live.' So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life, and they stood on their feet as a vast army. And then he said to me, 'Son of man, these bones are the people of Rwanda. They say our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Rwanda. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord." People of Rwanda, the Spirit of the living God has brought you back from the grave and breathed life into your very being. The evil that was once unleashed on this beautiful land has been overcome by the goodness that is God. God has breathed the breath of life back into this land. Every home and business that has been rebuilt is evidence that bone has come back to bone. And every sign that communities have been reestablished is evidence that sinews have been attached to them. And every report that the nation of Rwanda has been reestablished and her economies are flowing gives evidence that flesh has come upon the dry bones. And every indication that the people of Rwanda are healthy and thriving gives evidence that the breath of life has re-entered her. People of Rwanda, your work of reconstruction and reconciliation is a bright light to the world, a light that shines in spite of the darkest darkness, in spite of the greatest evils that have been unleashed. People have said of Rwanda, if they can forgive one another for the atrocities that have occurred, I can forgive anything. People have said of Rwanda, if they can rebuild a nation totally destroyed, we can build and rebuild anything. People of Rwanda, you are a light to the nations. The Spirit of God is at work in this place, shining bright. Bone has come to bone. Sinews have grown upon them. Flesh has been reattached, and the life of the living God has been breathed into you. You will not disappoint. In fact, you cannot. You have, and you will continue to establish justice. You have, and you will continue to model to the nations the power of God to heal, to reconstruct, to alleviate poverty, and to restore dignity to all people. As the gospel story continues to be proclaimed around the world, as the good news of the reconciling work of Jesus is heard around the world, people will understand how profound it is when they look to Rwanda. You are the gospel of Jesus Christ being lived out in a cruel and violent world. You are a light to the nations. And it begins with each person, each congregation, each community committing to love of God and love of neighbor. It sounds so simple, but in reality, it is the most difficult work we are called to do. And so, on this first Sunday of the new year, January 5th of 2020, hear the exhortation of the Lord, who says to you this day, "Well done, good and faithful people. Do not cease to do good. Do not cease to do the work of reconstruction. Do not cease to do the work of reconciliation. Do not cease to alleviate poverty. Do not cease to bring dignity to all people. For you are called to be a light unto the nations, the example of dry bones coming back to light, the evidence of the power of God to bring healing and restoration, the evidence that a commitment to love of God and love of neighbor brings healing, restoration, and reconciliation." Hallelujah and amen.